one of the things that we wanted to talk about is just the understanding the history. African Americans have actually been in the cooperative space since the 17th century. Literally, that's when they really started cooperating together. And then in the 18th century is where you saw the first recognized and recorded cooperatives. So African Americans have been in this space for a very long time. And as you kind of go through the space of the African Americans in cooperative space, when we look at kind of the new age right now and where we are, going back to some of the principles that were set forth by the Rochdale Society of Equitable Pioneers, that was a co-op founded in 1844 in England. I think you will see some of the opportunities that spoke about and just how much of the rich history. Well, however, if you want to get a very deep, that's a quick overview. If you want to get a very deep history, I encourage everyone to pick up the book, Collective Courage, A History of African Americans, Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice by Jessica Gordon Nimhart. Wonderful read, great history, and you will be enlightened. But joining us today, our panelists are Johnholtzclaw, President and CEO of Rochdale Capital. We also have Allison Powers, Manager of Cooperatives and Communities for Capital Impact Partners. And we have Anthony Goodwin, Business Innovation Director at National Co+op Grocers. So we are looking forward to this rich discussion around African Americans in the cooperative space. So I will have each panelist give themselves a quick bio intro to the audience to let us know kind of where they are, who they are, quick intro, but you are welcome to read their information in their bio that has been presented in all of the information that has gone out about the webinar. We're going to dig into financing, which we know is one of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome. And then we're going to dig into kind of the development and product innovation, something that we will hear about, which is also a very important part. In this world of, as we have listened to, many people have abandoned the 9-to-5 corporate job, and we have launched many entrepreneurs over the last couple of years in the pandemic. I think this is a good opportunity for them to hear what's great about being a co-op and kind of the opportunity that a co-op presents. So starting off today, Johnholtzclaw, we'll have you give a quick bio.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you to NCBA Cluser for having us all here today. My name is Johnholtzclaw. For many years, worked with the National Cooperative Bank, and many of you may know me in that light. But if you were anywhere near social media or on our website last week, we had the successful launch of a new community development loan fund called Rochdale Capital. It is not a certified CDFI yet, but it is new on the scene. It's separate and totally unaffiliated from the National Cooperative Bank, but obviously we take great pride in them being our founding and strategic partner. We will work to promote cooperative and community ownership and look forward to working with other co-op focused CDFIs across the country. And they were dredging the bottom of the barrel and chose me to be the president and CEO, but I'm looking for the opportunity. So thank you for having me, everyone.
Thank you for joining us. Next up, Allison Powers.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for having me this morning. My name is Allison Powers. I'm the manager of cooperative and community initiatives at Capital Impact Partners. I've worked in the co-op space for almost 20 years, first in limited equity housing co-ops in New York City at the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board, where I currently sit on the board of directors, and now at Capital Impact Partners. Capital Impact is one of the largest community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, in the country, and we financed over $300 million in co-op development, specifically in food, housing, and worker co-ops. And we'll talk a little bit more about CDFIs today and the role they play for co-ops.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. Anthony.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony Goodwin, Business Innovation Director at National Co+op Grocers, coming to you today from Toledo, Ohio. My background is in new store development and grocery operations. So spent some time in the large chain grocery world, had an opportunity to spend some time in the nonprofit world, really focused at the intersection of food access and health. And now excited to work within a co-op ecosystem. And so my role really focuses on innovation broadly, and that can be everything from new technology innovation, supply chain innovation, or innovation when it comes to kind of how NCG engages with members. So excited for the conversation today.
Awesome. Again, thank you all for joining us. Just so that everyone knows, this is going to be, a discussion around the table. So we're going to have a nice discussion about our topic today. And we're going to lead off with the first question of, what are the strengths and weaknesses of cooperatives in our current business climate? John, you want to tackle that one first?
I sure will, Stacey. Thank you. I mean, listen, I think when you look at the current business climate, I think there are some opportunities, and I think there are a lot of things that we continue to work on. I always say when the typical Black family makes 10 times less of the typical white family, then we've got a long way to go. And so I think one of the biggest strengths of cooperatives in this current climate is that there are these things that cooperatives can bring to Black and brown communities from a business standpoint, be it the democratic membership piece of it, be it the education, be it the opportunity to start their businesses together and not just alone. And again, also being able to have financial institutions like Capital Impact and LEAF and CFNE and others to provide them with much needed finances. What are some of the weaknesses? I think in a lot of ways, and I think cooperatives have been dealing with this since the 1700s. So we have to do a better job of telling the story and telling the story about how cooperatives, Black-led cooperatives, go back all the way back to the 1700s, as well as building upon the Rochdale story and how powerful they were back during the civil rights movement. There's so many pieces there that so many of the people in these communities don't know about, and I'd like to find some way from an educational standpoint to get us back there so that these businesses can grow.
Awesome, thank you. Allison, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing everything John said, I think that at this moment in time, the health and economic crisis has really laid bare the inequalities and weaknesses in our society and business climate, and they're really impossible to ignore at this point. I think there's a general sense of, people want control over their future, and they're seeking different ways to think about work, housing, food production, really every asset of life. We've all heard about the Great Resignation and how people, Stacey kind of talked to it earlier about how people are just, exploring whether it's starting their own business or just thinking about work in different ways. And co-ops really offer, an alternative way to think about the shared economy, wealth creation, especially, talking about the racial wealth gap and the work we need to do there, democratic ownership, education, building skills, all the things that John mentioned. So I think that that's a big strength right now, that it's really in line with some of the dialogue that's going on nationally. I think in terms of weaknesses, it kind of depends on what sector you're in, but in general, the co-op business model is still relatively small in the US, and a lot of people call it the best kept secret. And that is something that we need to overcome, because a lot of times there could be missed opportunities in terms of investment or government dollars. I also think we have to acknowledge that just because you're a co-op doesn't mean you're inherently more equitable, that co-ops reflect the membership, and there has to be real work done around undoing, white supremacy and gender inequities and all the things that are in our greater society. I also think that there can be a long runway and time frame to create real sustainable democratic co-ops. And sometimes that, can work against this fast-paced business environment that's happening right now and thinking about scale. So I think a lot more strengths and weaknesses, but it's good to acknowledge those as well.
Anthony, you'd like to share with us from your grocery perspective, what do you think some of the strengths and weaknesses are?
Yeah, I would echo the comments from John and Allison. I think just based on the climate that we're in, I think the pandemic really highlighted the vulnerability of food systems and some of the gaps in food insecurity that we were seeing. So from kind of a funding climate perspective, there's a lot of attention and opportunity, I think, in the ecosystem right now to lend itself to a lot of organizations that are interested in really starting to solve and address some of these challenges. So for new startups that are interested, at least from the grocery perspective, there really is a lot of momentum and funding opportunities just based on what the country has experienced over the last couple of years. And kind of a strength and a weakness at the same time is what is co-ops often rely on a local ecosystem from kind of a vendor and supply chain perspective. So in one way, co-ops were able to be a little bit more resilient when it came to some of the supply chain challenges that we were seeing. But on the flip side, they also, when in some of the products that they rely on nationally, they had the same challenges as any grocery store, but there was some opportunities as they often rely on local producers, farmers, for produce, eggs, milk, things like that. They were able to be a little bit more resilient and have those local ecosystems already developed.
Awesome. So, as you all spoke about, the pandemic really heightened a lot of the inequities across the board. It really, not that we didn't know they were there, but there was a spotlight shining on it. One of the blazing ones I always seem to say is the economic inequities in underserved communities. So as you're looking at that, and we talk about our next question, what are some of the barriers to entry as it relates to underserved and marginalized communities? Allison.
All right, I can kick it off. Well, first of all, it's a lot of work and time to start up a co-op, and a lot of this work can be largely unpaid. And some communities that start co-ops are in a privileged position that they can subsidize these startup costs, whether that's your own personal time or paying for consultants or services. But most people, and I think in a lot of Black and brown communities that have been excluded from wealth over the generations, they don't have that luxury and they need to have their time paid for. A lot of times there's childcare expenses, caring for elders, and it's really not an option to just, spend time over several years. And I think that a lot of co-op incubators and developers are thinking about how you fill some of this gap and how you maybe use some grant funding to be able to pay for people's time, but I think that can be a barrier to entry. We've touched on this already. There has been a whitewashing of co-op history over the years. So thanks to collective courage and other folks in the sector, we know about the history, but it hasn't been as widely known as could be. So I think there's just a familiarity with the model that can be sometimes a barrier. I think it's worth noting that some folks might have felt excluded from co-ops in the past. And that, again, like I said before, co-ops are a reflection of their membership. And so there have been times where co-ops have been a real safe haven for activists or social justice. But I think there can be also instances where the opposite has been true. I know I've, for example, spoken to people in a community that might be changing or gentrifying, and they might have felt, excluded from a a membership-based food co-op that's moved in, or, you know, housing co-ops that might have rejected applicants, or there might be some racial bias. So I think we also have to acknowledge that there can be, you know, experiences that might have made folks feel like there's barriers.
Great. John, what are your thoughts on that? What are the barriers to entry?
Well, I mean, I think just to build upon, you know, what Allison talked about. I mean, listen, economic equity is at an all-time low in this country, and it's something that we need to work on. You know, when you talk about, you know, 17% of Black households in this country are underbanked or unbanked, and you're talking about 14% of Latino households are underbanked or underbanked, compared to only 3% of white households. So you're already talking about a disparity as it relates to the financial services system. And so when you take that and you couple it with you having to educate them about the cooperative model and what that takes to be successful, again, you know, you can't, you know, LBJ had this great line in the speech to Howard University many years ago. You can't take a people that you've shackled for years and pull off the shackles and tell them to go to the start of the race and feel like the race will be fair. You know, we're really, and this stat surprised me from UC Santa Cruz. I mean, really right now, Black-owned businesses are at an astonishing 38% growth between February of 2020 and August 2021. And in my mind, why can't many of those be cooperative businesses? And even compared to white and Asian businesses, you know, it's 3% and 2%. And so again, there's a tremendous opportunity here, but at the same time, we've got to get past the barriers of the lack of capital and financing, and I'm sure we'll get to that a little later in the conversation. But also, more importantly, just a general understanding of the model, because just like Allison said, there's been a whitewashing of co-ops over many years, and you know, people think that, you know, REI is the only co-op in the world, or some of these really nice food co-ops that are in communities that are either gentrifying or are sitting right next to a Whole Foods. And so I think we've got to do a better job about reaching down into some of these Black and brown communities. And thank you so much, Anthony, for saying food insecurity and food security, because if I hear food desert one more time, man, I'm gonna fall out of my chair, because every time I go through a food desert, I haven't seen an oasis yet. So I'm still looking. So thank you for the food insecurity and security piece that you're saying, because at its core, that's really what it is. And so I'm a little all over the place here, so I apologize, but I feel like those are some of the barriers as it relates to working in some of the underserved and marginalized communities.
Awesome. Anthony, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think time to organize is a huge challenge, and being able to have people that can really dedicate time to the mission and to what it takes to really organize, whether it's a grocery co-op or a housing co-op, just the work that it takes to organize and raise capital, which I know we're going to talk about. I would also kind of echo what Allison was talking about, and John, with the history. You know, when I look at it for NCG and perspective, we've got about 150 members, about 215 stores, and the majority of those are natural organic co-ops. And so if we look back at history, really in the 50s, 60s, 70s, we've seen this real kind of influx of natural organic co-ops before there were natural and organic grocers. And so over the years, that just kind of continued to build and form. And as more and more stores and more co-ops started to form, you know, naturally there was kind of value in most of them are purchasing the same goods. They're, you know, catering kind of to the same audience. And so there's value in the numbers as those natural organic co-ops were able to grow in size and kind of continue to organize together. We haven't necessarily seen that in the conventional co-op world, or, you know, co-ops that are located in low-income communities or communities of color. There have been, of course, co-ops that have done it, but each one kind of is doing it out on their own, and there hasn't necessarily been, an organized effort. I use that term loosely, but to really come together and do it at scale. And so I think we're at a point where we're there, but historically, they're just that hasn't been the case.
Awesome. So, kind of the theme one, we see that, people kind of we need a marketing effort behind co-ops, and especially to our communities of color, because they don't understand it, they don't get it, they felt left out of it. So that seems to be definitely a theme running through there, but also we do understand the financial backing is a hard piece. And everybody needs that to launch. And with all of these entrepreneurs that have come into the space, they need their capital right away. They need, so we have to educate them, obviously, on what it takes to get started. And again, that might be an opportunity to pair people up that are working in the same vein to launch a little quicker and help them start a co-op. So some great information and insight there, taking a look at it. One of the things when we talk about capital, you hear a lot about CDFIs. So what are CDFIs and why are they important to marginalized communities? Allison, you want to give us a
sure.
Give us a little bit of
I'll read the kind of definition and then interpret that as how I see it. So community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, are financial institutions that are 100% dedicated to delivering responsible, affordable lending to help marginalized communities join the economic mainstream. That's the kind of, but basically, Capital Impact and other CDFIs are mission-driven organizations. We use private capital to leverage federal, state, local, philanthropic subsidy to make targeted investments in Black and Brown communities and others that have been historically disadvantaged. CDFIs were really created to fill a gap and be in communities where banks would not go. If the bank decides to be in the same market, they usually have a cheaper source of capital and maybe can offer better rates. But CDFIs really aren't here to compete with banks. The goal is to maximize impact and not shareholder value. So that creates a different relationship with the borrower. It's important to kind of have somebody who is on your side and is kind of rooting for the success of your project. CDFIs can be a little more flexible and work through complex projects and capital stacks. We always tell our borrowers that you don't have to hide your challenges, and we'll help you work through the inevitable issues that might come up. A lot of CDFIs also offer technical assistance or programs that work with their target community and really help inform their lending products and what they're doing. And I think something that's really important is Capital Impact and many other CDFIs are really focused on the racial wealth gap and are having conversations about how to rethink some of the institutional barriers around credit and risk and kind of what the whole system means. And not saying we're totally there yet, but just trying to be innovative and think of creative ways to try to overcome some of those barriers that we all talked about before. And lastly, I'll just say that I think it says a lot about an organization or a sector of how they measure their own success, and CDFIs measure their success through impact, and that can mean number of affordable housing units created, number of jobs created or preserved, number of patients receiving healthcare, and so on and so on. And so that's really the frame in which we work.
Awesome. I mean, that's very important given history, and like we said, most of us not having Black and Brown, not having the generational wealth that sustains us, and having somebody who can lend us to get an upstart. So it's wonderful to look at an opportunity where someone sees that and can talk through where you are, what you need, and how you can move forward. So that's awesome. John, you want to give us a little insight from your
Sure
perspective?
do. I mean, I mean, not only working for NCB and then now for Rochdale Capital, I've had the honor the last 2 years of being the board chair and president of the National CDFI Coalition. My term ends on March 8th. It's bittersweet, but I tell you, it's been a pretty good run. And I'm gonna, Allison did such a good job. I'm just gonna build upon it by saying that CDFIs are basically alternatives from a financing standpoint, but their main role a lot during this pandemic has been financial first responders. And so I think it's so important when you look at, the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, CDFIs, and this is of May of last year, made 1.3 million in PPP loans, totaling over $30 billion, or 21% of all loans, where the average size was 21% compared to other lending classes at 41. So it goes to show you that, again, everybody didn't need the 1.3 or the 500,000. Some folks just needed the 21 to get them across the finish line. And nearly 40% of all those loans were in low and moderate income communities compared to 28% across all the other lending sources. And so, a large part of CDFIs are not only just loan funds or community development banks, but more importantly, they're community development credit unions, which are cooperatives, which have membership based and whatnot. And so again, I think when you look at that, and then many of them being minority deposit institutions, I think that they played an important role. But I will say a warning, and I say this privately and I say it publicly, is that every day that we get away from the racial and social reckoning that was caused, by the death of George Floyd, my fear is that a lot of the interest or a lot of the things that a lot of the corporations and others have done becomes less and less, because we'll do the $10 million deposit into the MDI, we'll do the press release, we'll put it out on Twitter, and then we'll go on about our business. And so again, one of the concerns that I've had about a lot of MDIs is that while all those press releases and all that money is great, a lot of them don't have the technology platforms that they need to get that money on the street. And so something has to be done from a congressional standpoint or whatnot, or to help them do so. Because if you've been working with 7 loan officers for the last 50 years and somebody drops $10 million on your deposit sheet, you're worried about your regulator coming in saying, hey, you got too much liquidity. Well, there's the challenge. And so I think that the popularity and the interest in CDFIs is only going to grow as time goes on. But I hope that level of growth is also aided by the level of resources that are available for them to do their job successfully.
I think you brought up a great point, John. I mean, after the pandemic, after George Floyd, yes, there was a heightened awareness because the world has stopped and everybody had to pay attention. As someone who's worked in DEI for 15 years, DEI wasn't new, but they did not have to pay attention because they did not have to see it. So you're right, the farther we get away from it, I think, as in before, we go back to the times where it's part of a corporate culture, but it's not focused on as it is. So something for us to think about is, how do we keep the foot on the gas, so to speak, and how do we keep everybody engaged? Because it really is about what we do as a nation as we move forward, and how do we make us better all together. So thank you for that. And as we talk about that, kind of the, we kind of talked about it. Capital for a business is one of the largest hurdles. Obviously, we know that. So are there any additional gaps you would say when it comes to capital that you all have experienced when you're looking at new co-ops coming up?
Can I ask Stacey that Anthony go?
Sure.
If that's okay,
Sure.
in regards to this.
Yeah, I would say one of the gaps is around market studies, and at least from the grocery perspective, in order to secure funding, you've got to have a market study that shows a certain market opportunity or business opportunity. Oftentimes, funders are looking for a certain level of members that the co-op has already been able to appeal to prior to issuing any kind of funding. And as I've been talking over the last couple months with co-ops that are located, they're either Black-led co-ops or co-ops that are located in low-income communities, oftentimes the traditional market studies that are out there don't do a great job of recognizing some of the unique components that exist in some of those communities of color. And so oftentimes there can be this gap or challenge in that the markets, even though we know people live there, oftentimes those areas are highly dense, people are purchasing food. It doesn't always show up within some of the tools that exist today. And so one thing that several organizations are focused on right now is making sure that we have culturally competent market studies and assessment tools that can truly assign a real value to those neighborhoods so that they're not losing out on funding opportunities. And then the other piece is the need for longer term financing, in my opinion. Even if a new co-op is able to secure development or startup financing for construction, there still is that longer term operational deficit that they may face. And so, if there was money to be made quickly, oftentimes the traditional grocers would be in these neighborhoods doing it. And so although they may be able to secure funding and open a store, there's still that long-term need for some subsidy possibly as they continue to grow and hopefully within a few years break even. But I guess I would say market study and the need for longer-term financing come to mind.
I think we've kind of gone through our capital, what we need for that question enough. What can you all tell me? How are your organizations being more intentional about serving the marginalized communities? Do you have programs in place that are intentional and specific to these communities?
Allison, you want to go?
Sure.
I'm just from the South, so I was going to ask Allison if she wanted to go. Go first.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of our whole purpose is to have programs and lending products that are intentional. I'll just say, we've all kind of mentioned DEI here, and I'll say that there's the internal examination of your organization, which can be pretty extensive, whether that's what are your hiring practices, or does your board reflect your staff, or what sort of vendors are you hiring? I mean, it can be, there's a lot of work that we've done and other organizations have done, but it's also thinking about, what you offer in terms of programs, where are the gaps, what tools fill in those gaps, are there, how do you look at credit and risk as a financial institution, and those types of things, and really, starting to push those boundaries. We've at Capital Impact, we realize that there's not always debt that's needed, just borrowing money is not always what's needed, and it's not always the best option, especially with co-ops. One thing that we've recently launched is a new investment tool where we invest directly into impactful mission-related co-ops. We can invest alongside a lender and really help provide a different type of capital. We also we work with the National Cooperative Bank to run the Co-op Innovation Award every year. And these are really early stage grants for innovative co-ops in communities of color who are thinking about scale and replication. The application comes out in the spring, just quick plug. But just to say that we, and some of these Co-op Innovation Award winners, this is really seed money, have come to us years later for needing, a loan or investments. So just really thinking about the different stages of co-ops, whether it's early stage seed money or there's other money besides debt that's needed, and also thinking about filling in the gaps in financing. I'll say program that I'm managing called Nourish DC, which is focused on Black and brown food businesses in Washington, DC, and is very inclusive of co-ops, whether that's a food co-op or, you know, a worker-owned food business. We have something called a flexible loan pool, and this is really to help fill the gaps for high impact needs and really to be money that we know is needed to get over the finish line, whether that is equity or loan loss or money for consultants they might need for new markets tax credits. I know there was a new markets question in the chat. And so it's really recognizing that there might be gaps because there is a racial wealth gap, and there has been, you know, a exclusion from intergenerational wealth and access to that kind of wealth. And so we need to anticipate that. And, you know, depending on what community you're from, and if wealth has been extracted from that community, you might not be able to have a friends and family campaign at the last minute to raise the you know, $50,000, $100,000 you need to get that over the finish line. So you need to kind of anticipate that and have something in place where you can identify, you know, what does high impact mean? What are you trying to get to? And having that capital in place and ready to be deployed.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. John?
And I'll say this really quickly. You know, I think everyone's very aware of the bank's mission, or the uncommon mandate we have from a mission lending standpoint. You know, they also know that we were created in the same congressional act that created Capital Impact Partners. And so I think that over the last several years, especially during my time at the bank and working with other CDFIs, we try to be very intentional about working in Black and brown communities. We're working on a transaction right now in Detroit that we're really excited about, that is going to be a Black-led co-op that you know, is the first transit-oriented development that Detroit has done. But building upon that, the bank is still a bank, and there are regulatory limits that they come up against as it relates to some of the mission lending pieces that we tried to do. And then really building upon the vision of our former CEO, Chuck Snyder. You know, the creation of Rochdale Capital was precipitated to kind of fill that void, you know, not to be an affiliate or a subsidiary of the bank, but to be a separate strategic partner. And I think that what we're going to try to do at Rochdale is we're going to try to reach these marginalized communities. And again, and Allison touched on it earlier, I think one of the most unknown things about CDFIs is that development services are such a huge part of what they do, and that's education. And you know, it's not always financial capital. A lot of times it's human capital. And if anyone can go on Capital Impact or NCB's press releases and read about some of the former winners of the innovation grants, not only are they amazing cooperators, but they're just amazing stories. And so we take great pride in working with them around that. And so again, obviously more to come on Rochdale Capital, and I'll be looking to working with all of my other cooperators and good to try to further this message as it relates to doing work in these communities. But I just wanted to put a pin in it there from the standpoint of just giving the high level story about the creation of Rochdale and why it came to be, but also just talking about how the bank has been very intentional in its outreach to marginalized communities.
Awesome. And Anthony, when we talk about the co-op grocery space, can you tell us about you all's intentional efforts?
Yeah, sure. So we're starting to see, you know, within the co-op startup space, about 2/3 of new food co-ops right now are really, their mission is to use a co-op as a solution to solve for food insecurity and to really invest in communities. And so I talked a little bit about the history of NCG. But we're really right now in a space to kind of listen and learn and be able to fill gaps for these communities, new co-ops that are really interested in leveraging a co-op, you know, which has several jobs. And we think about several values, whether we think about living wage jobs, you know, democratic ownership, the actual access to healthy and affordable food. But the same kind of challenges exist, whether they were thinking about starting a grocery store or starting a co-op. And so again, how do we identify what the gaps are, whether it's the length of time that it takes for these co-ops to open, coming from the nonprofit world, and then kind of the corporate, traditional grocery world. Stores open in 2 years at the longest, because typically there's an operation party already identified, there's funding already identified, and I was surprised, being relatively new to the co-op world, that some of these stores take 8, 10, 12 years, and 8 is considered fast. And when you're solving for food insecurity, you don't have 8 years. So I think it's just, how can we shorten that time that it takes? How do we make sure that that funding is available? And then I talked a little bit about supply chain earlier. I think one huge piece is going to be being able to bring some kind of national value to from the supply chain perspective, which in the grocery industry, it's you net 1-2%, you're doing great. And so on those thin margins, power in numbers is really critical. And so how do we make sure that as these new co-ops open, they're able to kind of leverage off of each other instead of each one operating as their own independent co-op?
So as you think about that, Anthony, are there, as they get started and as you're looking for suppliers, are there certifications that those organizations may need? And, minority supplier development, are you looking for any of those things when they want to come into your space as a supplier?
Yeah, from the supplier perspective, we're working and focused on supplier diversity as well. And so one example, we're working with a Black farming cooperative down in Mileston, Mississippi. And from the agriculture perspective, BIPOC farming supply farmers only receive about 1 to 2% of total agriculture business. And of course, there's some systemic issues in that. But whether we think about lack of capital investment, lack of market opportunity, food safety is a huge barrier oftentimes. And so we're working with Mileston Cooperative Association down in Mileston, as I mentioned, to figure out kind of what are those gaps, so that we can get them the food safety requirements that most of the distributors require, whatever kind of systems they need to have in place, and then ultimately be able to have their product as an option for our co-ops to order and put into their stores. So not only are we focused on member and co-op diversity, but also, as you mentioned, diversity and kind of the co-op food ecosystem as well.
Awesome. Very impressive. That's great work and needed work. A lot of people don't understand those certifications and those needs that they should have to get into the spaces that they ultimately want to get into. So as we've talked through this whole thing, education is a key to a lot of the challenges and opportunities that we have. So, looking forward to us really launching into kind of an education and a marketing campaign as it relates to people of color in the co-op space. So we have a couple of questions. We'll launch into a couple of questions, and then we'll go for a round of kind of closing out with everybody giving us a quick, couple of bullet point items to tell us what people should leave here with, what they should think about. So in looking at our questions, one of the big questions was, how can we hold CDFIs accountable? Allison and John,
I think first and foremost, I think people need to understand, people pass community development credit unions or community development banks every day and never really know that they're certified CDFIs. So I think it's important to know, who are these loan funds and these other organizations across the country who can probably help you faster as a cooperative business, more so than some of the larger mainstream banks. And so, I think you hold them accountable by having them put their money where their mouth is. If they're talking about working in BIPOC communities and you apply for a loan and something happens, and you don't get it, I also think you hold them accountable. And this is something that I've been talking about the last 2 years and probably beyond on the coalition, is that, you hold them accountable by having diverse boards of directors, and you hold them accountable by having CEOs of color. I've been so amazed in my work that you have CDFIs that work in these Black and brown communities, but their board doesn't necessarily reflect that diversity. And so there are a lot of different ways, learning about who they are, seeing what their track record is, seeing the products that they have, seeing how a loan goes with them, but also to taking a look at their leadership and making sure that it mirrors the communities that they serve.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, we, push back. People push back on us and hold us accountable a lot. And that's created a lot of innovation within the organization. I'll give a quick example. There's something that we run called the Equitable Development Initiative, or EDI, and it's a program for developers of color to help get them kind of a seat at the table in their community, like Detroit or DC, where there's a lot of development going on, and the city is a good majority or majority Black and brown, but yet the big development projects are not going to those local developers. So it's really to help them scale up. And we created this program, and it was mostly kind of technical assistance and peer networking and professional development. And the developers came back to us and were like, well, yeah, that's great. We have this professional development and we've reached a certain stage, but we still cannot get a loan. So you need to create something, you need to create some sort of funding. And so then we created a loan fund around it. And then it's like, is this loan fund working? Is this the right kind of capital? So I think that, you have to, if you're working with a CDFI, be vocal if folks are not, if you don't feel like they're filling the need, because that's the reason they're there, is to fill a gap. And yeah, so that's all.
Awesome. I mean, it sounds like with the CDFI, you kind of have your own checks and balances in place. Again, impact is kind of what you're looking for in a CDFI. So I imagine that helps you, and as you're going through the process, helps you kind of develop new products within your organization and serve more people. So thank you for those answers. Anthony, there's a question. I'm interested in the impact measures that have been expressed by our co-panelists. Can you discuss quality of life and quality of health impacts?
Yeah, so I guess speaking from my experience working within the healthcare space, I had the opportunity to work with several healthcare partners that were interested in the intersection of food access and health outcomes, and several of them opened nonprofit grocery stores to address food insecurity needs. But their interest was, beyond more long-term and beyond just food access. And so we're starting to see a lot of research right now around what is the actual impact of addressing food insecurity or opening a grocery store in a neighborhood that lacks access. And of course, that takes a little bit of a longer strategy, but being able to actually measure, was there an impact to, obesity, hypertension, other, chronic diseases, overall health outcomes, health status of a neighborhood. And so, that's where it's important, if you're able to partner with health departments or nonprofits or healthcare systems, then they're able to bring, not only can they be kind of an anchor partner and possibly a funder, but they're able to also bring that lens of how do we track the longer term impact. And John mentioned gentrification earlier. Certainly, a lot out there around. So you open a new store, but is it culturally appropriate? Does it have products that the community wants to buy? Is it the right pricing? Is it reflective of the neighborhood? And so making sure that as these stores open, that they actually solve a need, and that they're not, pushing community out of the neighborhood, which ultimately has no impact on the health of the legacy residents, at least. And so, yeah, kind of to sum up, I think it's a longer term a metric, but certainly something that's very important.
Awesome. And let's see, let's go to another question. I think we may have touched on it, but I'm not sure. Someone had a question, what is a MBI and a DBI?
MDI to DBI? Well, an MDI is what's called a minority deposit institution. And so they are Black banks, Asian American Pacific Islander banks. There are indigenous native banks. There's Latino banks. And so again, they have a classification because they are led by people of color. You have some, like where I live, Mechanic and Farmers, which is over 100 years old. It's the second oldest Black bank in the country. That started in downtown Durham on Black Wall Street, and it's still here today. And so again, rich histories there, but I remember vividly 10 years ago, and I hope this doesn't get me in trouble, that a mainstream bank executive said that they were no longer going to work with MDIs. And I forgot whatever the reasons were. And for 10 years, they ran around looking for liquidity and everything else. And so again, once the racial and the social reckoning started across the country, now many of these banks can't take any more deposits. So funny how that works. And so what was the other question? The DW, what was it?
MBI and DBI.
They got me on that one. I may have to Google that one. I don't know DBI.
Or maybe they heard something wrong. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, it might be right, but I apologize. I don't know what a DBI is. I know a whole lot about MDIs, but not
yeah.
what DBI is.
Okay, gotcha. And for the person who asked that question, if you want to type it back in, maybe we missed something on that one, and we'll try to get to it. We're winding down, but we've got a couple of other questions. Could there be a co-op fear in the Black-brown communities where history shows that measured success draws negative attention that leads to destruction? We are recreating wills that were destroyed in Rosewood and Tulsa. Some may feel flying under the radar is best. What are you all's thoughts on? Or do you have any thoughts?
No, I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, listen. I did a podcast some time ago, the Renegade podcast, and someone had asked me, what is it like being a person of color in the financial services world or the capital world or whatnot. And one of the things that I had to express to them specifically is that I don't know about a lot of people, but I'm Black every day. I'm Black every hour of every day. And again, it's something that I think about every second of every day and how it works in the arena that I'm in. But at the same time, we have to learn from that history, and we have to learn from, there are many Black co-ops that have started, and folks like, well, why we got so many meetings, and I don't understand how this thing works and the model. And so they would shudder. And again, we have to learn from those lessons and not make it keep us from doing it again, but at the same time, if we open up these Black cooperatives or businesses, we got to support them. You can't open up a Black food co-op that's received tons of work from Anthony and folks at the Cooperative Grocers deal. And then you say to folks, well, yeah, but I've been going to Food Line and Harris Teeter and whatever all this time. Well, you can't have it both ways. And so if that is going to be a part of the community, we have to support it, and we have to take part in it. And so, like I always tell people, we celebrate Black history in February, but our people's journey is 365 days a year. So, have the Black history sale all you want to, but again, it goes on 365 days out of the year.
every day, all day, right?
Trust.
Awesome. Thank you for weighing in on that. We're getting close to our start time. We promised till 12 noon. So I am going to kind of close it out, wrap it up here. Thank you all for participating. I think it was a very rich discussion, a necessary discussion, and I look forward to kind of the future work going into it, and also making sure that we keep the whole DEI aspect at top of mind presence as we continue to build in our communities of color in the cooperative space. Obviously, we've touched on the fact that marketing seems to be a huge piece of what we need to do to give people a comfort level in growing in this space. So we hope that we have the opportunity to help in that, we can gain from this momentum of those people who have left the traditional workforce and are starting new opportunities as entrepreneurs, and hopefully bring them into the cooperative space. For those listening, just next week, I'm going to do my little commercial here. Next week, we will be presenting basically on how to get started in a co-op. We have Cynthia Pinchback-Hines from Co-op Cincy, who will be doing a webinar, and we're going to have Asada, who's going to tell us all about the home care piece. So they're going to give us some information. I hope you will tune in. It's on the 28th at 2 p.m. You will get a information in our Co-op Weekly, which hopefully you are all signed up for. If you are not signed up for Co-op Weekly, we will drop the information in the chat. So the link in the chat so that you can go in and sign up to make sure that you don't miss any of these opportunities that we make available for you. So I'm going to say thank you. Thank you all for joining us, but thank you to John, Allison, and Anthony for lending us your expertise in this. We appreciate it, and we look forward to continuously working with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome.